Welcome to the Adult Children Voices Across America Speakers Meeting podcast. You may attend this meeting live on Thursdays at 6 p.m. Pacific Time using the Zoom ID 848-520-80640, password 061120. For more information about adult children of alcoholics and dysfunctional families, visit adultchildren.org.
The following speaker share from Ken F. was recorded on July 25th, 2024.
I'm Ken, and I am a bicyclist. I'm a kayaker, family man, roller coaster enthusiast, leader and team member, writer, YouTube creator, therapist, friend, a bit of an awkward dork, and an adult child. I grew up in a suburb of Orange County, California, back when the interstates were just coming through and LA was growing, and my father worked in aerospace and got transferred, and my parents packed up everything from the San Fernando Valley in Los Angeles and moved to this neighborhood where we were kind of in an insulated tract. So I spent many, many years growing up in the same house, on the same street, going to the same schools. I had almost too much stability in my house growing up. I, looking back, wish that I would have at least moved once to have that opportunity for some change. But grew up with the same kids, the same faces, pretty much middle-class families. The mothers, for the most part, stayed home while the dads went off to work. And my parents were Archie and Edith Bunker. So if anybody here knows the TV show All in the Family, I would go to my grandmother's house, and on Saturday night, she would ask me what I wanted to watch on TV, and she'd ask if I wanted to watch All in the Family. And as a kid, I remember saying, no, it's like being at home, and I'm not at home right now, so why would I want to watch something like that? My father was very much nails on the chalkboard like Archie, just racist, bigot, had to be right about everything. If he said the sky was green and I would say, Dad, the sky's not green, it's blue, he'd start yelling at me, and, he always had to be right. And of course, my sister knew how to play the game, and she'd say to me, why do you do that? You know that he always has to be right. Why do you always challenge him? That was a good question. Never really figured that one out. My mother was very much the Edith Bunker, the placater. She always had to have my father's food on the table first. Very much into catering to my dad. And I understand my parents' dynamics. I didn't understand so much when I was a kid. Getting older and looking at things, I see things much different now. As a kid, my dad was just unavailable. And when I reached 12, 13 years old, my dad, instead of being somebody that I was trying to get close to, I just realized that was never going to happen, and I just labeled him the asshole. My mother was very nurturing, but we didn't have religion in my house. We had Emily Post. So with my mother, everything had to be with manners, what was proper, what was not proper, what's the right way to set the table, what's the way to hang the toilet paper. My parents would get into arguments over really dumb, stupid stuff. And it was always, the Emily Post was what came out, this is what Emily Post said. And that was my mother's magic sword to try to win all the fights with my father. I didn't see a lot of love between my parents growing up. I didn't see a lot of nurturing. My mother got married when she was 17. Her father died at 15, so I think she was replacing my grandfather, and had my sister, and shortly after having my sister at like age 23, 24, got a divorce. So when she met my father in 1960s, she was a single parent. And I think my dad had some stability in his life and kind of a win-win situation for them, although I don't think love really was the element of what brought them together. And that pretty much was evident for like my entire life. Once as an adult, I saw my parents, we were out playing billiards, and I saw my parents actually interact and seem to enjoy each other's company. And that was like the first and only day that I have ever witnessed that. So my parents were the Bunkers. My mother had a daughter, so my sister was 4 years older than me. And I never considered her my half sister because she was always in the house and her father was out of the picture. So I always just grew up with her being my sister, even though I knew that she had a different father. And she was the Marcia Brady. She was the hero child. To some extent, she got perfect grades. She had the perfect looks. She had all the friends. But in our family, the hero child was actually the dog. That was my dad's good boy and companion. The dog could do no wrong. And, his standard of what a good kid could be would be the dog, because the dog never complained. The dog gave him unconditional love. And that wasn't the case with my sister and I. So the dog got all the attention. And I love dogs, so don't get me wrong. I didn't grow up jealous of the dog. I think, if anything, I'm more partial to dogs now because the dogs were put on such a pedestal and revered in my family. I was the last born in my family. So, there were just two kids in the household, but out of all cousins and stuff, I was the last born. And instead of being the baby of the family when everybody else was older than me, I was always looked down upon as the obnoxious one, the irritation. So the role that I played in my family was the cousin Oliver. If everybody has watched the Brady Bunch and know who cousin Oliver is. So being the last born in my generation, everybody kind of wanted me to be more adult than I was. My cousins and my sister were like in junior high at the same time, or high school. They were taking foreign languages, they were doing other things, and that wasn't where I was coming from. And it was very hard for me to try to fit in and try to put masks on. And with that environment, I just grew up with a lot of shame and a lot of abandonment and really wanting to be understood. I just wanted to be a kid. And it seemed like that wasn't okay. And in my house, my parents were very overprotective, and I couldn't ride my bike farther than just a few houses down the street. Couldn't ride to the store. My parents didn't like me to get my play clothes dirty. There was just a lot of fear that I was brought up with. The world is a scary place. There are people out there that can do horrible things to you. My father would tell me bedtime stories, and the one that I remember the most was the Lindbergh kidnapping, where somebody climbed through a kid's window and took them, and they found the kid dead. So anytime I'd hear a noise outside my bedroom window, I'd get freaked out and upset, and just grew up with all this fear of the outside world. Of course, when I'd come downstairs and tell my parents that I thought somebody was trying to break into the window, I'd get sent back up to bed without them trying to comfort my fears. So that just kind of made things lonelier and a little bit more a sense of abandonment. My father, I don't think, really knew how to parent. He was 36 when he had me, and I think he was a very old 36. The things that were important to him were like the appearance of the house, our dichondra lawn, which was absolutely perfect, but being perfect meant that we couldn't play on it. And he wanted to have a son that was perfect too. He told me once when I was, I think, in first grade, my grades were dropping, that no son of his could get C grades. And if I continued to get grades that were mediocre, that he would send me to military school. And in military school, there would be nobody there to love me and show me any type of nurturing. And so if I wanted to, go somewhere cold where I would be punished and get demerits and put into solitary confinement, all these horrors were put into my head. So even though I was very starving for attention in my house, the alternate just seemed so much worse than what I already had. And it actually devastated me because I was held back in the first grade. And I was in a combination class with, I think there were 6 or 8 of us first graders, and the rest of the class were all second graders. And I think over half of us were held back. We just didn't understand what was going on because the teacher was teaching most of the class at a second grade level. And I just remember the feeling of shame and abandonment, knowing that all my friends were going to move on to the next grade, and that I was going to have to repeat a whole year of my life over again. That was extremely shameful for me. And I remember just feeling so out of control, begging my parents to let me progress. And that was just kind of a done deal. So I remember watching a TV show, a morning show with my mother, and one of the things that the guest was talking about was children and their drawings. And if you ever see a child draw a picture and they have a frown on their face, that shows that they're unhappy. And I remember seeing that and not wanting anybody to know that I was unhappy. So every time I was asked at school to draw pictures, I always made sure that the people in the pictures had the biggest smile imaginable because I didn't want anybody to know really what was going on with me. I thought that I had it worse than everyone else. And as I got a little bit older in school, in the neighborhood, there were other things that were happening, like the neighbors next door lost their house because the mother and father, and they had 4 kids, the mother had a gambling addiction and they lost the house and had to move. Another family got divorced, and after the divorce, the mother moved her girlfriend in. And then in 4th grade, the girl that sat in back of me, her mother over Easter break jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge. But I noticed these kids picked up and moved on. They didn't seem to be in pain. And they had friends because they had other support around them, other people to kind of balance out the pain and let them know that they were going to be okay. And in my world, I was very isolated, and I didn't have that. I didn't have many friends because I couldn't go out. I didn't have a father who showed any interest in like throwing the baseball with me. So when I did stuff like that, it was like my mother that drove me to the baseball practice. And I just didn't have any positive male role models in my life at that time and was very lonely. When I transferred from elementary school to junior high, I had all these threats in front of me that people were going to throw me in the trash can. When I got to the junior high school, I was going to get beat up every day. And I had the option to go to a different school. And I begged my parents, please don't let me go to this place where I'm going to be harassed. And they listened and they let me go to the other school, but they told me it was farther and they weren't going to drive me and I had to get there on my own. And I said, that's fine. I don't mind. And I had a bicycle, and the other school was 1.5 miles away, and I started riding my bicycle to school. And that was kind of my saving grace. That's when I went from being Kenny to being Ken, and felt the freedom of the bicycle because I started now developing physically where I had no physical ability prior to that. However, there were still a couple kids that saw how weak I was. I was very skinny, very unathletic, and there were 3 kids that were bullying me, and there was one kid that left me with PTSD. This was in 7th period, and it was a reading class, and what he would do is he would wait for me to get into whatever I was reading, and he would sneak up and back of me with his textbook, and he would thwap it over my head. And like in the cartoons where you see the stars and the little birds flapping around, that's kind of what it was like every time I got hit in the head. And I had talked to the teacher and she never saw it happen. And it happened repeatedly. My father at one point gave me permission to break the kid's nose. He says, if he ever does this to you, I give you permission. I will come down to the school and I will stand up for you. So I was able to fight back at one point in time. And when I did, that's when the bullying ended. But for many years, I had a lot of difficulty reading and focusing because there was just always this hypervigilance that as soon as I lose my focus and my guard, that I was going to get hit over the head. And that really played tricks on me for many, many years. It still comes up from time to time, but that's not something that I deal with on a regular basis now. And I'm really thankful for that. So the bicycle became my best friend. The bicycle became my ticket out of the house. And my parents, who were overprotective, once they realized I could start riding my bicycle to school, all of a sudden they were trusting and kind of like went the opposite. All of a sudden now you can take yourself to your dentist appointments. You can take yourself to your orthodontist appointments. And with that freedom, I started going farther and farther. And I started riding my bicycle to the beach during the summer, almost every day, and the closest beach was 10 miles, which was Bolsa Chica Beach. And then I started riding to Huntington and then to Newport and then all the way to Laguna. So I was really building my miles up. And when I was in junior high school, I had started going to a church, and the high school group in that church was doing a bike trip, a 5-day trip from the mid-California coast back down to Orange County. And I begged them to let me go on that trip. And, they looked at me being so skinny and scrawny and said, this is, a trip for the older kids, the high school, college kids. And I proved to them that I could do it. And in doing that, that trip changed my life. I knew that I really wanted to see the world on a bicycle. And in doing so, I started meeting role models, people that actually I looked up to and said to myself, I want to be like these guys. In 1983, I did my first long trip because I had been doing a couple like overnight weekend trips, but I did a trip where I flew to San Francisco by myself and rode back down to Orange County. And I met somebody the second day out who I rode with for a few days. And then I met a guy from Montreal. He was heading over to Australia. And I ended up riding with him for about 4 or 5 days. And they kind of became my role models. I never thought I would do anything longer than a week trip. I was going to retire my bike when I finished the San Francisco trip. That was going to be it. Reached my bucket list. I was done. But after seeing these people and realizing that I could stretch myself even farther, that's what I worked to attain. However, I was still struggling internally at that time. There's a saying, hurt people hurt people. And I had been, ridiculed and put down so much in my life that the friends that I started to develop in high school and college, I didn't know how to handle those friendships and relationships. And I think looking back that I did a lot of hurt and damage with a few people that I really cared about. And, that's certainly part of my amends with my step 9 with that. Like most people in California, I wanted to be an actor. And I think one of the reasons I wanted to be an actor is because I didn't want to be me. And in junior high school and high school, I did a lot of community theater. I did a lot of theater at school. I wanted to be a writer. My goal was to write my first book so I could drop out of high school early and go into acting, and had this fantasy, all this grandiose fantasy of like how I would do this. And I went to a adult education creative writing class when I was in junior high school. And I went to that same class, I think for like 3 years. I was by far the youngest person in that class. And there were people in the class that were writing soft porn. It was a very adult class. And I tended to fit in a little bit better with the adults than I did with kids my age. I really felt safe there. And one of my role models was the teacher. She was just this amazing spitfire, and she had a little manual, and the manual cost $1, and I didn't even have $1 for the manual. And I think my second year there, she gave it to me. She said, "You're one of my most dedicated students." And I still have that manual somewhat because it just meant so much to me that she cared enough about me to give me that manual. My cycling ended up getting a little bit bigger because as I started getting disillusioned with the whole acting thing, because in college I would show up to an audition and I would see 150, 200 guys that looked just like me that showed up for the same part. And I was getting very disillusioned. Growing up in a family where there was a lot of stability, there might have been violence, but there was a lot of stability. I was in the same house for like 23 years. I needed something a little bit more stable than that. So I was getting disillusioned with the acting. And in 1 week, I had 3 people ask me to ride cross country with them. First one asked me to ride to Florida. It's like, nope, sorry. I'm camping down in San Clemente, and I met a guy from Montreal who was riding to South America, and he asked me to join him. And it seemed like such an amazing lifestyle. And this guy was like doing it with a guitar strapped to the back of his bicycle. What a wonderful life to be able to take off and do something like that. But once again, I'm very cautious. I don't make impulsive decisions. And then later that week, a third person asked me to ride to Chicago with them. And I just said, if we're going to ride to Chicago, let's just go to Nova Scotia and end up in Boston. So that's what I did with my friend and another friend that joined me. We set out on June 6th, 1985, and we set off to ride our bicycles across the United States. Now, the two friends that I was with, they were dealing with their own situations, their own issues, their own concerns, and one of them dropped out in Idaho, and the other one, when we got to Chicago, he ended his trip. And when that happened, I was devastated. Even though them quitting had nothing to do with me, it tapped into all of my abandonment issues. Why am I such a freak? Why can't I go on a regular vacation like regular people and have a regular life? Why do I have to put everything on a bicycle and do something so extreme? I just was really feeling bad about myself for not being quote unquote normal, and just feeling that abandonment. And it didn't make me want to quit. It didn't make me want to stop my trip, but it did just bring back all that horrible pain. And before my friend dropped out in Chicago, we were at Yellowstone, and I was at a church service in the evening at this amphitheater out by the lake right after sunset. And they asked for a prayer request. And my friend was having a lot of doubts about whether he wanted to finish the trip from Chicago on to Boston or not. And I asked for prayer for him. And afterwards, an old gentleman wearing a business suit, and this is when I say older gentleman, he was probably in his 70s or maybe even 80s, came up to me and he said, "I believe in young people, and I believe in you and what you're doing. Here's $20. I want you to have lunch on me tomorrow." Now, $20 in 1985 went a lot farther than it did today. I was eating at Bonanza all-you-can-eat buffets, which I could get all-you-could-eat salad bar, which was everything, and a drink for under $5. So that $20 was a lot, and I just felt so humble that somebody would believe in me like that. And I had people inviting me into their house, take a shower, all this stuff along the way that just blew my mind, that other people could see things in me that I couldn't see in myself, because nobody else ever showed me to believe in myself. People that helped me, I had a thing where I took down in my journal their address, and I would send them a postcard at the end of the trip. And I told this man, "Can I have your address? I'd like to give you a postcard when I get to Boston. That way you know that I got there safely." And he said, "No need to do that." He said, "I just believe in young people, and I believe in you." And he turned and he walked away. And that story always makes me cry, because that was really a turning point in my life, in finding value in myself, having somebody mirror that back to me. And I think that is why I have worked with teenagers and young people for many years. I sat on the governing board of a hospitality organization for cyclists, and I've hosted over 300 cyclists in the last 10 years, because those are young people and I believe in them. So, total defining moment in my life that changed my life. I started healing at that point in time. I went to college. I walked into my first ACA meeting in 1988, which is a totally different story, so we're not going to talk about that. Walked in, walked out. But I got a lot of healing through my profession, changing my major to be a therapist, and all the training I got, the internship, the therapy I had for myself. All that really did help me to grow. I think over time, I kind of grew into the person I wanted to be. I had this alter ego. His name was Mr. Tour. Mr. Tour was the identity I had on my bicycle, because my bicycle was kind of like my Superman cape. With my bicycle, people could come up and talk with me. With my bicycle, people weren't afraid of me. I wasn't threatening. I was doing something a lot of people really admired. People would come to me and they'd say, "Wow, I can't even ride my bike around the block, and you're riding all the way to Boston." And being the scrawny kid I was, it's like, if I could do this, anybody could do it. It took me a while to realize that maybe anybody can do it physically, but it's what's up here and what's up here that really makes the difference. And when those people say I couldn't do it, I have to realize that maybe there is a gift that I have, and maybe I can inspire other people too. So I really liked that aspect of myself that had the courage when there were no campgrounds around to be able to knock on someone's door, a farmhouse somewhere, a church, and say, hey, you know, I'm Ken and there's nowhere to stay around here. Can I pitch my tent somewhere in your field? I had the courage and the confidence to do that. So when I wasn't cycling, when my life became, back to normal and I wasn't doing, all these big grand trips, I wanted to be that Mr. Tour. I wanted to have that same confidence without my cape, without my bicycle. And I worked really, really hard at doing that. And I think I did well. I really do think that I did a lot of healing. So when I walked back into ACA, which it's been 10 and a half years now, I came back in because somebody asked me if I would speak at the convention that they were having in San Diego. And I thought that was a great honor. And one of my role models, Claudia, was speaking at that convention. And it's like, wow, I want to know who I'm talking to. So I walked into an ACA meeting and I really loved the vibrato of the secretary. And, he had this presence about him and he was very welcoming and the meeting was great. And I was only going to go for a few weeks. But I noticed after about 4 weeks that my reactivity in certain areas of my life had been decreasing. And it's like, I'm getting something out of this. I thought my life was good, and it was good, but I could still do some polishing around the edges, and I still had some rough edges to polish. And I still do, by the way. But coming to the meetings and continuing to come, I was able to start realizing that I didn't have the great emotional sobriety that I thought I had, and that there was room for improvement. After about a year or so being in the meeting, I got a sponsor, started working the steps, started giving back. I think there were 5 or 6 conventions in a row, 5 or 6 years in a row that I spoke at the conventions. And to me, that was an honor. But I was speaking from the point of view as a therapist and in treating adult children, not necessarily dealing with my own stuff. Nowadays, when I do presentations like this, I kind of see this as doing another 5th step because I'm trying to be a little bit more honest and speaking more where I'm coming from myself. I really have been in the program, like I said, for 10 and a half years. I haven't taken really any breaks. I don't necessarily go every week. My life comes first, and ACA is what helps me to kind of maintain the balance in my life. So if I have a trip planned, if I have an opportunity to do something with friends, that usually comes first, but I don't stay away from the rooms for more than a few weeks. And even when I'm traveling, I'm extremely connected with my fellow travelers and people in the room. So I want to fast forward to June. Just recently, I rode my bicycle around Lake Erie. That was kind of one of the things that I wanted to do. And I did it with a friend that I met in 1998. And he and I have been cycling together. We do kind of about one trip a year. I'll do one trip on my own and one trip with him. And we finished our 26th trip. So this was our 26th trip around Lake Erie. And a friend of mine and fellow traveler was telling me that she was going to go to Niagara Falls in July, and she had moved to Connecticut. And I wrote her and I said, how flexible are you on your plans? Because I'll be at Niagara Falls in June and I would love to see you. So she changed her plans and met us at Niagara Falls. And she loves roller coasters like I do. And I had already spent 2 days at Canada's Wonderland riding the roller coasters, and she wanted to go to Six Flags. This kind of put a little bit of a crimp in the trip because we were having to hit certain points of the trip to get all the way back to Detroit in time to fly home. And in order to go to Six Flags, I had to kind of surrender and humble myself and say, can you give us a ride? Because if we go to Six Flags, that's going to take up basically 2 days of cycling and we're going to need to get back on course. And she said, yes, no problem. Well, my friend, he's 69, so he's starting to go a little bit slower than me, but he's steadfast. He still has it. He said to me, he said, you know what? I think I'm going to skip Six Flags because you guys are going to go camping and I need to be in a hotel. I need air conditioning. It's hot. His motto is, I didn't work for 40 years to not stay in a hotel. He says, I've worked 40 years. I can afford this. I'm going to do this. So my first thought was, uh-oh, is he going to leave me? When I get to meet him in Erie, Pennsylvania, is he going to tell me that he's decided to take a train the rest of the way? Because he did mention that at one point, that, hey, there's a train that we can take from here to here to here to get to Detroit. And when I thought about it, it's like, if he decides to do that, that's okay. It's okay. He can choose to do his vacation the way he wants to. I love him. He's one of my best friends. I love his companionship, but I also can do this on my own if he chooses that this is the best journey for him. And to me, that shows a lot of growth in that I can allow other people be who they are and I can be who I am, and we can celebrate the time we have together. And if that doesn't work out, then I can respect that too. Last year, our trip was to ride our bicycles from London to Amsterdam, and 6 weeks before the trip, he fell and he broke his wrist. So instead of getting upset, feeling abandoned, anything, it's just like, we've had 25 years of amazing trips. Nothing bad has ever happened. What's plan B? And we worked it out. Plan B was that he met me in London and we spent almost a week together, going to shows, going to museums, riding roller coasters. And then there was one day where I just said goodbye and I gave him a hug, and he took the train back to London, and I got on my bicycle and I rode to Amsterdam. And on the way, I stayed with friends, people who have been in my house that I've given hospitality to, that I was able to see them again. And, once again, the whole bicycling story, comes full circle. And before I went on the trip, my granddaughter said to me, she said, I hope you learned something about yourself on this trip. I always am surprised when young people kind of slap me in the face with wisdom. And the things that I've learned about myself on this last trip was I learned that I still need to work on patience. And usually with Philip, I get upset with him. Usually he's my riding companion. I usually get upset with him when my blood sugar drops. And it has nothing to do with him. And I have to realize when I get frustrated, it's like I need to put some sugar in my system. But I'm still working on patience. I've learned that I don't need to feel abandoned any longer, which is huge, like I mentioned. And I learned that I like to surround myself with younger people. So there was somebody I met on a previous trip. I was by myself and I was at Cedar Point about 3 years ago, and I was in the single rider line and I met another single rider, and he was this 30-year-old who had the same thing. No one's going to go to the theme park with me. His girlfriend bailed on him the day that he was going to drive down from Buffalo, New York. And we met and we clicked. So we spent the rest of the day together. And when I was heading up to Canada's Wonderland, I sent him a message and said, hey, I know you're in Buffalo. Do you want to hit one of these parks with me? So he drove up to Buffalo and we spent the day together. He's afraid of heights. I'm afraid of heights. And we were on this ride that just dangles you 250 feet above the ground and holds you there for about 15 seconds before it's a roller coaster, before it releases you and drops you. Your legs are dangling. There's no floor to this. And I'm holding on. I'm clutching it. We're both kind of clutching it. And he said to me, just lean into it. And when he said that, I relaxed and I leaned into the harness, because there's a harness holding you in. And as soon as I leaned forward, the damn thing just let go and I just went down, and it was like the most freeing feeling. And every time I went on a ride like that, the rest of the trip, if I didn't know the person next to me, and usually it was some squeamish little girl, screaming, and I would just say, just lean into it. So I'm approaching life like that now. When things get rough at work, when things get rough at home, reminding myself, hey, it's okay. Just lean into it. So now where I am in my life, I feel much more balanced. I feel much more stable. I used to want to write books, make movies. I always wanted to build an amusement park. I'm okay now watching other people's movies, reading other people's books and riding other people's roller coasters. I think my goals in life today are to do no harm, to not be hurt and to stop hurting other people. I want to keep working on my bucket list, which keeps expanding instead of getting smaller. The more stuff I check off, the more stuff I learn and I want to do. And my goal is to be half as good a speaker as Claudia Black. because I've heard her several times. And I figure if I'm half as good as her, I've reached the bar that I want to set for myself. And looking ahead, I have a bike trip planned for this coming September. I'm flying up to the Pacific Northwest and going to be doing some biking with my friend up there. I have some camping trips planned with friends and family and fellow travelers. And now I'm kind of challenging myself more to learn about the ACE study, if anybody here is familiar with ACE, and the ACA triangle. So the ACE study is a Kaiser study that was done in the mid-90s. They wanted to find out why people were getting sick. Do they have anything in common? And ACE is actually the science that's underneath ACA. And that's one thing I really like about ACA and learning about ACE is that, ACA isn't just some, warm, fuzzy stuff that people can read other people's minds and know why they're hurt and to help them out, but there's actual science behind it. And the ACE study showed that the ACE stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. And as you hear these, they kind of mirror the qualifiers for ACA. Emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, violence of any kind in the home, substance abuse of any kind in the home, whether it be illicit or illicit drugs, mental health problems in the home, emotional neglect, physical neglect, divorce or separation from parents, and having a household member go to prison. I'm really looking at the science with this and teaching ACA. A lot of people, they hear ACA and they say, well, my parents were alcoholics, or, my AA sponsor doesn't want me to do that. They don't want me to go to ACA right now. But when I'm looking at it and learning about the science behind it, if I can teach the science and then say the place you go to work on this stuff after everybody can identify with the science is ACA. I'm really excited about that. And I'm really trying to learn as much about the ACE qualifiers and, how that mirrors the ACA Big Red Book. The other thing that I'm really looking into right now, as far as my recovery and getting back, is the triangle. And in AA, the triangle stands for Unity, Service, and Recovery. It's a triangle. The bottom point is recovery because the unity and service sit on top of that. And I think that's really important. And I didn't realize that was a part of ACA. I really didn't. I thought it was just an AA thing that didn't carry over until I was looking at the ACA chip. And guess what? There's a triangle there. And the triangle says unity, service, and emotional sobriety. I'm really digging right now, looking at how the three things come together. The unity is the fellowship. And I know in the parking lot meeting when we were starting, I was talking about how the home group that I go to, we go to fellowship every week afterwards. And I have to say, I wish I was looking at all of you in person, because it is so much different when I see people and I can see that people are nodding and I'm not looking at a camera with just other faces around. It's so much nicer when I'm looking at somebody. And that's what I get out of my home meeting. I get that unity. I get that support. The service, I love. I'm kind of like the fill-in person there. If somebody, doesn't show up and they need somebody to lead, if they need somebody to take over for the secretary for a week or two, if they need literature or something, I live real close to the mothership here. I can pick up literature. I love being of service and just contributing in every way, because it's my way of giving back everything that was given to me. And I've reached a point in my life where, part of my bucket list is being able to give some of this stuff back and to touch lives like all the people have touched my life. And then the last part, the emotional sobriety. This is working the steps and working the traditions. ACA over the years has gotten a lot more literature and a lot more complicated. The Loving Parent Guidebook is amazing. It is rebranded psychotherapy. As a psychotherapist, I can read through the whole Loving Parent Guidebook and break down individual things and say, okay, this is actually cognitive behavioral therapy. This is DBT. This is internal family systems theory. Everything has just been rebranded for ACA. It's a wonderful piece of literature, but I think people are forgetting that at its core, ACA is a 12-step program. And it really is important for us to focus on the steps the first 3 steps are getting to a place of humility. And if we're the hero child, if we're, whatever role we play in the family, we have that rebellious teenager and that critical parent that wants to fight us at every step of the way. And it really is important in steps 1, 2, and 3 to get to a place of humility. Now, in the Loving Parent Guidebook, you understand a little bit more of the mechanics about what's going on with that. But I think it's really important and of value to work the steps and to understand the 12 ACA traditions as well. And I know those are read in a lot of meetings, but in my meeting, there's not a lot of sponsorship. A lot of the ACA meetings I've been to in the area, there's not a lot of sponsorship. And one of the ways that I want to give back is I want to try to get people through the steps to where they can start to give back and sponsor people. So that's kind of what's on my agenda, on my bucket list. Now, I can't control other people, places, things, or situations, but I can make myself available at least to guide people if they're available and want to do that. Because I would really like to see this fellowship get a lot more into its foundation. In AA and NA and Al-Anon, you have a lot more people that are in long-term recovery that help guide people through. And in ACA, there's a lot of people that are still struggling that help others, but they don't have the same footing that you get from the other fellowships. And the people that I've looked up to the most in ACA are the people that actually have come out of AA and have worked the steps in AA and understand the mechanics of that, because they've been the biggest guide for me in ACA with their ACA knowledge in addition to what they've gone through in their other fellowship. So that's what I'm working on right now. I want to end by basically wrapping it up and saying that I'm going to be 62, and I'm very happy where I am in my life today, because when I was a kid, if you would have told me that I was going to be where I am today with a career, family, direction, respect, stability, confidence, and most importantly, gratitude, I didn't think I would ever live this long. When I came back from my first cross-country trip, I was 23 years old, and having to go back to a normal life after being on the road for 4 months, I realized I never really planned on coming back. So here to be 62 years old and being where I am in my life, I have so much gratitude. And I wanted to be Mr. Tour. I wanted to be that alter ego, and I feel like I have become him and surpassed him. Very thankful for that man at that service in Wyoming, because he touched my life in ways that I don't think he would ever know. So I'm happy today, and I wish all of you happiness and peace and insight on your road to serenity. I want to challenge all of you to be the hero of your own epic journey. And with that, I would like to say thank you so much for letting me share.